Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this lovely Wednesday morning. Great to see you. I hope you're well and cheerful, and thank you for joining us. As always, thank you for joining us and being with us this morning. Well, welcome to a real toughie for this morning. I hope you've got your thinking caps as well as your flame retardant trousers, because you're going to need them this morning. Welcome to one of the toughest passages in the whole of the New Testament. It's ironic that in the middle of it, Mark says, "Let the reader understand," right in the middle of, like I say, one of the most difficult passages to understand in the whole of the Bible. But here goes. Let me remind you, frog in my throat, let me remind you of the context. Jesus has just left the temple, okay, and then the disciples have been awestruck by the wonderful buildings and so on. And Jesus has said, prophesied that one day, not one stone's going to be left upon another. And of course, that happened in 70 AD. He then goes with his disciples to the Mount of Olives, and they sit down in a place where they can see the temple right in front of them. And he begins a speech. And yesterday he told them all about the destruction of the temple and how it was going to happen. And this morning we're picking up his talk about a third of the way through it. So I'm picking it up at Mark chapter 13. I'm going to start reading at verse 14. Bear with me, this is tough stuff, but I'll try and explain it to you afterwards. Here goes. Mark 13, starting to read at verse 14. Jesus said, "But when you see the desolating sacrifice set up where it ought not to be," let the reader understand, "then those in the Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the housetop must not go down or enter the house to take anything away. The one in the field must not turn back to get a coat. Woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that it may not be in winter. For in those days there'll be suffering such as not been since the beginning of creation that God created until now. No, and never will be. For if the Lord had not cut short those days, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, whom he chose, he's cut short those days. And if anyone says to you at that time, 'Look, here's the Messiah,' or 'Look, there he is,' do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will appear and produce signs and omens and lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be alert, I've already told you everything. But in those days, after that suffering, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will be falling from heaven, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken, and they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. Then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see these things taking place, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But about that day or hour no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be aware, keep alert, for you do not know when the time will come. It's like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his slaves in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to be on the watch. Therefore keep awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. What I say to you, I say to all, keep awake." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Get yourself out of that one, Vicar. Right, let's just see firstly what we've got here. Jesus talks about a time when there's going to be, a lot of people are going to be, times are going to get tough. Firstly, a lot of people are going to get pulled astray. Secondly, there's going to be the most horrendous persecution. He also talks about a time when there's going to be what he calls an abomination of desolation and a huge act of desecration act. And if you want to know what that looks like, in Daniel prophesied that, and it's widely thought that he's referring here to something that happened under a guy called Epiphanes in 167 BC, where some people, there'd been a Jewish revolt, and to crush the revolt, to make the point that the revolt had been crushed, this guy had gone into the temple and he'd sacrificed a pig in the middle of it, just to make this point, this massive deliberate sacrilege. And that's the kind of thing Jesus is talking about here. So he says, there's people who have been led astray, there's going to be persecution, there's going to be some sort of desecration going on, and then some great event is going to happen. The question is, the $60 million question is, what is Jesus talking about? Is he talking here about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, like he was yesterday, or is he talking about some greater event in the future when he's going to return? Because bits of it refer to both. The bit about running to the hills and not wanting to be pregnant in those days because there's going to be a big flight going up, big running away here. That's no point doing that at the return of Christ because you can't get away from that, can you? That's clearly talking about the temple. On the other hand, things like the days will be darkened and the moon change colour and so on. That can't really be talking about the destruction of the temple. That's talking about the second coming. So, is he talking about the destruction of the temple, or is he talking about his return, his the second coming, the parousia, call it what you like? Well, good Anglican, good Church of England answer is, I think it's both. I think he's cleverly weaving the two together. He's prophesying about the destruction of the temple, which happened in 70 AD, and happened very much in the lifetime of the readers of Mark who read this in the early 60s. I think he's talking about that, but I think he's cleverly weaving in and using that as a prototype, you might say, of what a greater event that's going to happen in the future when he's going to come back. Because we do say in church, don't we? Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So is he talking about the destruction of the temple, or is he talking about his return one day? I think he's talking about both. I think he's cleverly weaved the two in together. But what can we learn from this? Firstly, this. I think all this apocalyptic stuff's got a bit of a bad press, partly because of sort of people like the Jehovah's Witnesses and all these cults and so on, and I mean, the one thing these cults all seem to have in common is they all seem to think they've got the last word on the last things, don't they? Have you noticed that? But actually, I think if you read this through carefully, it tells you that when we need to know, we'll know. But I think it tells us really that the important thing is not knowing some clever secret. The important thing is about being awake. The important thing is not about having supernatural knowledge of the future. The important thing is about being faithful now. Is about being, so if Jesus did come back this afternoon, we'd be ready for him. We wouldn't be caught on the hop, you might say. The important thing is not being in possession of some clever mystical secret. The important thing is about being faithful to God and faithful to Jesus now. So it's massively relevant for us, We don't know, Jesus says that even he doesn't know when he's going to come back. The important thing for us is to be faithful and be ready in case he does. So make sure that we keep short accounts to people, that we are close to God and we are faithful to him now. So the important thing is not some sort of supernatural, special, secret message of the future, like they seem to think they've got. The important thing is being faithful to Jesus now. And that's something we can all do. The second thing is this, which is great, is that when Jesus makes it clear that when the persecution comes, and persecutions do come, God will help us. We talked here about this huge persecution, but God shortened the days for the sake of the elect. He talks about they've been given the words to say and so on. So when persecution comes, when times get difficult, God will help us. So don't get worried. The important thing is that God will strengthen us. We have the Holy Spirit in us. And when the time comes, when times get difficult, as these will, when that happens, trust God that he'll give us what we need. It says here, he shortened the days for the sake of the elect. And also, as I say, he gave them the words to say and so on. So God is at hand and God will help us. And the third thing which is really important about this tells us clearly that God is in charge of events. And I think the people who read Mark at the time, and I think people like us need to be reminded sometimes that God's in charge, that history really is his story, that actually it is God who is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that he knows what he's doing, that he's in charge of events. Like I say, that history, really his story. And God wraps up time and God will do what God wants to do in God's time because God is king. Not some of these great rulers of the world and so on. They may think they are, but this passage reminds us that God is in charge of events. So, all this stuff reminds us, say, three important things. The important thing is not being in possession of some incredible mystical super secret. The important thing is about being faithful to God and being faithful to God now. Secondly, that when times get tough, that God will be with us when we do. And thirdly, to remind us that God is king, that he reigns supreme, and history really is his story. Tough passage. I hope it makes sense. God bless you, and